The night was quiet in the small town, and the streets were almost empty as a single human walked slowly toward his home, carrying the tired weight of the day with him. The lamps above gave a pale yellow glow, and the air smelled of rain, though no rain had fallen yet. He felt the cool breeze touch his face as he turned the corner and followed the cracked sidewalk toward the narrow road that led deeper into the old neighborhood. The world seemed calm and silent, but in that silence something strange waited unseen. He stopped when he noticed a figure standing near the edge of the road. At first he thought it was only a late traveler or a farmer heading home, but then he saw the way the figure moved, too stiff and too controlled, almost like someone trying to copy the way humans walked without knowing how. The figure was tall, with a long shadow that stretched under the street lamp, and the light reflected off its strange clothing that did not belong to any style he had ever seen. The air around it felt heavy and strange, like something from a dream. The man's heart beat faster, but curiosity pulled him closer. He had never seen someone like this in his quiet town, and the figure raised its head as if sensing him. Glowing eyes met his, and for a moment he thought he was looking into the light of distant stars. He wanted to turn away, but the figure stepped forward and raised a hand as if asking for peace. Its voice came low and broken, like someone who had learned human words only by hearing them once or twice. The words were strange but clear. "Enough," the figure asked for directions. The human blinked in surprise. He expected many things, but not a request as simple as that. The figure repeated itself again and again, using words in the wrong order. Asking for the way, asking for the path, asking where the place of gathering was. The human frowned and looked at him carefully. He thought maybe this was a foreign traveler from some far land. Maybe lost, maybe in need of help. The human had always been taught to help strangers and to never turn away someone in need. So he pushed aside his unease and tried to answer. He asked where the figure wanted to go, and the stranger made a sound like static before shaping more broken words. It pointed toward the sky and then back to the ground. It repeated again, the place, the point, the landing. The human grew more puzzled. He thought of the nearest airport, but the figure shook its head. Then he thought of the bus station, but again the figure only tilted its head. Finally, in simple words, the figure said, "Show the way to the meeting place. Show the way to the landing field. Show the way to the base." And the human thought about the wide, empty mountains far to the north, where the Air Force sometimes trained planes, and where old stories spoke of hidden bases. The man raised his hand and pointed toward those mountains, the peaks barely seen in the distance under the stars. He said, "If you want a field, you will find one there. If you want a base, maybe you will find one there too." The figure's glowing eyes followed the line of his arm and seemed to shine brighter. It gave a slow nod and stepped back as if satisfied. The human thought he had done something simple, nothing more than help a lost traveler find his way. But something in the figure's stillness made him uneasy. The alien or stranger or whatever was tilted its head again and repeated "thank you" in a voice that almost sounded like metal scraping on stone. Then without another word it turned and walked away into the shadows, its tall form melting into the darkness beyond the lamplight. The human stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what he'd just seen, unsure if it was even real. Maybe he was only tired. Maybe his mind had played tricks on him. Yet the memory of those glowing eyes and the strange words stayed in his head like a whisper that refused to leave. He shook his head and laughed nervously, telling himself it was nothing, just a late-night meeting with some strange traveler. Maybe someone from far across the world. Maybe someone who had trouble speaking. Maybe someone who wore strange clothes for reasons he could not guess. He tried to push away the unease and continued down the road toward home, the night air colder now. His steps quickened as if something unseen followed him. Far above, hidden behind the clouds and stars, great shadows moved silently, enormous shapes waiting for a single signal. Warships larger than cities drifting in the endless dark, their commanders listening for a report, their fleets waiting for one voice to tell them where to strike. And that voice was the figure who had just spoken to the human, carrying the directions he had been given, believing every word, preparing to send thousands of soldiers to the place the human had pointed toward. The human reached his home and unlocked the door, still replaying the strange meeting in his mind. But inside he found comfort in the familiar smell of wood and old books. He told himself he would forget by morning, that it was not worth troubling over. and soon he lay down in a small room, while above the Earth engines began to wake. The night deepened, the stars burned silently, and one human, without knowing it, had just altered the path of an entire fleet, with nothing but a simple answer given in kindness. The morning sun rose over the small town as the human woke to the quiet sound of birds and the faint rustle of wind in the trees. He tried to forget the strange figure from the night before, but the image of glowing eyes and the broken words still lingered in his thoughts. He told himself it was nothing, just a traveler lost on the road. Yet somewhere deep inside he knew it had felt different, heavier, like the weight of something far larger than his own life. As he made his way through the town, he noticed how everything seemed normal. People walking with baskets, children running through the narrow streets, merchants opening shops and greeting neighbors. The world around him moved as if nothing had changed, but he could not shake the thought that something unseen had begun when he raised his hand and pointed to the distant mountains. He had given directions without thinking. Yet the memory of the stranger's sharp gaze and slow nod made him uneasy, as if he had signed something without reading the words. Far above the Earth, the fleet stirred. Vast warships in the dark expanse shifted their positions. Silent signals passed between them like whispers of static. They trusted their scout, the figure who had asked the human for directions. They believed he had found the correct point of entry. They believed the instructions were exact. Engines hummed, and giant forms moved slowly in the void, like shadows of steel drifting toward a path now set by a single human answer. The scout returned to his vessel with precise steps, carrying the simple words given to him. He repeated them to his commanders, describing the way toward the mountains, the wide spaces, the hidden places. The commanders listened and marked their maps, their voices calm and confident. They thought this human was clever to give clear guidance. They did not imagine that it was an accident. To them, it was the work of a careful trickster pointing them to what they believed was the true target. Every choice they made now turned on the human's innocent answer. Back in the town, the man sat outside his small home. He watched the horizon where the mountains rose like dark teeth against the sky. He remembered the way the stranger had looked toward those peaks, as if they were a promise or a threat. He felt a strange chill even though the morning air was warm. He wondered if the stranger had reached those mountains already. He wondered what they hoped to find there. He told himself again it was none of his concern. But the thought kept returning like an echo that refused to fade. As the day passed, clouds drifted across the sky. Shadows lengthened on the ground. The human carried out his simple tasks, fixing the fence, drawing water, speaking with neighbors who laughed and shared stories. Yet every pause brought the memory back, the glow of alien eyes, the broken words, the strange stillness. It was like a dream, yet too sharp to be forgotten. He thought perhaps he should have asked more questions, perhaps he should have refused. But he had answered without thinking, and now it was too late to change. In the dark of orbit, the fleet prepared to descend, their engines charged with silent fire, their ships aligned like a spear ready to strike. They believed the mountains hid the heart of the human world. They believed victory was only steps away. They did not know they had been led into wilderness, into emptiness, into silence. The innocent gesture of one man had rerouted them completely. Yet none among them doubted. They moved as a tide, unstoppable, certain of what awaited them below. The human returned home in the evening, the sky painted in orange and red as the sun sank low. He sat by his window and watched the horizon darken. Again his eyes wandered to the mountains. Far away, but always present, he felt a strange weight on his chest, as if something vast pressed down upon him. He thought again of the stranger's final words, a broken thank you, sharp and metallic. The sound had not left his ears. He whispered quietly to himself, hoping it had been nothing more than a trick of tired senses. Night came and the stars appeared, one by one glowing faintly. But hidden among them, new lights moved with silent purpose. The alien fleet descended slowly, vast shadows sliding into the atmosphere, their shapes too high to be noticed by human eyes, their courses aligned toward the empty peaks. They did not know they had been misled. They trusted in the words carried by their scout, words spoken by a man who thought he was giving simple help, nothing more. In that moment, a quiet truth settled upon the world, though no one yet knew it. A single human act had changed the course of an invasion. Not with weapons, not with armies, not with strategy, but with a simple gesture of pointing toward mountains. The story of that act would one day spread across stars. But for now, it was hidden in silence, hidden in shadows, waiting for the first clash of fate to reveal what had truly begun. The human lay in his bed, drifting between waking and sleep, his mind uneasy, his dreams filled with lights moving across the sky, voices he did not understand, shapes that stretched too tall and too thin. He woke suddenly in the dark, his heart racing. He walked to the window and looked again toward the mountains. The night was quiet, the air still, nothing stirred, yet far beyond his sight the fleet drew closer, guided only by the words he had spoken in innocence. And so the night passed, silent and fragile, while the human rested unaware, while the fleet descended with purpose, and the world waited unknowingly on the edge of something vast and irreversible, a turning of fate that had begun with nothing more than directions spoken in kindness. Far above the quiet towns and sleeping villages of Earth, the sky looked calm to human eyes, yet behind the curtain of stars enormous shapes drifted in silence. Warships the size of floating cities hung in the darkness, their armored hulls black against the void. Hidden from every telescope and radar below, they had waited a long time for the signal. They had prepared their weapons and their soldiers, and now at last they began to move. The fleet listened for the words of their scout, the one who had gone down among the humans, the one who returned with the path to the landing. His report was trusted without question. The commanders accepted his directions as truth. They believed he had found the perfect entry, a point of weakness where they could strike and take control. They never imagined that the path he carried came from the casual hand of one ordinary man who thought he was helping a lost traveler on the street. Engines glowed faintly as the first ships aligned with the course. Their power was enough to shatter continents. Yet they moved with quiet precision, like hunters circling prey. Each vessel released coded signals. Each signal was answered. Their formation spread across the sky like a black net ready to close. The mountains pointed out by the human now burned bright on their charts. They thought this was the center of human power. They thought this was the place to break Earth. Inside the command ship, alien voices murmured across wide halls. Officers studied maps glowing with shifting lines. Soldiers strapped on armor and checked weapons, their minds filled with certainty. They had invaded other worlds before. They had crushed weaker species with speed and fire. They thought Earth would be no different. They thought victory was already theirs. None of them questioned the strange simplicity of the directions. None of them wondered why the scout had spoken of empty spaces and wild peaks. They only believed. Meanwhile, on Earth the towns remained calm. Lights flickered in windows. Families shared meals. Children drifted into dreams. No one looked up to notice the faint trails far above the clouds. No one saw the shifting shadows in the sky. Humanity moved through its ordinary night while destiny approached silently overhead. The man who had spoken with the stranger slept deeply in his bed, unaware that his single gesture of pointing toward the mountains had already been carried into the heart of a fleet. The alien scout stood alone in his chamber, remembering the moment when the human raised his hand. He replayed the image again and again in his mind. He had seen something sharp in the human's eyes, a strange calmness. He believed it had been deliberate. He believed the human had known the weight of his answer. To him, the directions were not accident, but strategy, a trick meant to lure the fleet toward a place of power. He never understood that it had been nothing more than kindness mixed with confusion. In orbit, the ships descended slowly, layer by layer, sliding into atmosphere like silent knives. Heat lit their hulls in faint orange glows that faded quickly. They kept high above radar, their signals masked, their weapons armed. Commanders whispered orders across channels. Soldiers tightened their grips on rifles and blades. The invasion was no longer a plan. It was in motion, and all of it guided by the innocent words of one man. The mountains below waited, dark ridges stretching across wide lands, forests covering valleys, rivers carving paths of silver, snow resting on high peaks. The world there was empty, no cities, no armies, no defenses, only silence and wildness. The fleet expected to find strongholds and resistance. They expected to strike fear into human leaders. But what awaited them was nothing more than wilderness. And yet they would not know until their boots touched the ground. The human stirred in his sleep, his dreams restless. Strange images filled his mind, shapes too tall and voices too sharp. He saw lights moving across the sky, though his eyes were closed. He saw shadows stretch across mountains. He woke with a start and sat in the dark listening to the night. Only the wind moved through the trees. Only the sound of insects filled the air. He shook his head and told himself it was only a dream. But in the vast space above him, the dream was becoming real. Whispers spread through the alien fleet as scouts reported progress. They spoke of the chosen landing field. They spoke of the perfect approach. Their commanders nodded with satisfaction. They believed the humans would be caught off guard. They believed Earth would kneel before sunrise. They believed nothing could stop what was coming. But the truth was already twisted. Their entire path rested on a single false direction. The stars grew faint as the night stretched on. Clouds thickened above the mountains. Thunder rolled quietly across the peaks. Lightning flickered in the distance. The alien ships continued to descend through the storm, their vast shapes hidden by wind and rain. The invasion moved closer with every breath of the world, and still the human towns lay silent, the people unaware, the earth itself holding its breath. The man sat once more by his window, unable to rest. He looked toward the mountains, their shapes faint under the storm. He wondered again about the stranger. He wondered if the traveler had found what he was looking for. He whispered to himself that maybe tomorrow he would forget. Maybe tomorrow life would return to normal. But deep inside he felt the weight of something unseen, as if the stars themselves watched him with unblinking eyes. And so the night carried on, with shadows moving above Earth, with fleets shifting like black rivers in the sky, with commanders whispering of victory, with soldiers preparing for battle, with one human waiting in silence, unaware of what he had already set into motion, unaware that his voice had become the compass of war. The storm rolled across the mountains as the alien fleet broke through the cover of clouds. Their vast hulls glowed faintly with heat as they pierced the sky. Thunder echoed against the peaks and valleys. The air trembled as shadows of steel covered the land. These ships were meant to descend upon great cities, to crush defenses, to terrify armies. Yet what awaited them was not a human stronghold, not a fortress, not a base of power, but endless wilderness stretching far in every direction. The first wave of ships lowered with precision. Their landing gear extended. Engines howled as they touched the rocky slopes. Dirt and snow scattered under their weight. Soldiers poured from the bays, their weapons raised, their armor bright against the storm. They expected resistance. They expected fire from human machines. They expected to meet battle cries and war drums. Yet they heard only the wind moving through the trees. Only the cry of wild birds carried on the storm. Only silence where they thought they would find fear. Commanders stepped forward and studied the land, maps in their hands, data on glowing screens. They expected to see towers of steel. They expected to see defense grids. But all they saw was stone and snow, ridges and rivers. Their brows tightened. Their voices rose. Confusion spread across their ranks. Something was wrong. Something was broken. The path they had followed did not lead to human power. It led to emptiness. In the forest below, strange animals stirred, frightened by the thunder of engines. Deer bolted through the trees. Flocks of birds lifted into the storm. Wolves howled into the night. None of these creatures knew that an armada had landed. None of them cared for alien weapons or alien pride. The earth itself only sighed with wind. The mountains only waited as they had for ages, silent and unchanging, unmoved by the invasion. The alien soldiers spread out in formations, scanning the slopes, searching for hidden bunkers, searching for signs of human presence. Yet their scanners returned nothing. Their vision showed only rocks and ice. They sent signals back to the command ships, their voices filled with doubt. Questions rose through the fleet. How could the humans hide so well? How could a base vanish without trace? The commanders whispered among themselves. Suspicion grew heavy in their minds. Perhaps they had been deceived. The scout who carried the directions stood before his leaders, his voice steady. He told them he had spoken with a human who knew the way. He told them the human had pointed to these mountains with certainty. He told them it was not error but plan. Yet his words now sounded fragile under the weight of emptiness. The commanders began to doubt. Their eyes narrowed, their voices sharp. They wondered if the humans had played a trick on them. They wondered if they had been led into a trap. But no trap revealed itself. No armies came rushing from caves. No weapons fired from hidden walls. There was only storm and silence. Only the vast emptiness of wild land. The soldiers felt unease grow like cold water in their bones, for they had seen many battles and many enemies. Yet never had they seen an enemy that fought without fighting, that turned aside an invasion with nothing but silence and absence. It felt unnatural. It felt dangerous in ways they could not name. Far away in a small town, the human slept lightly. Dreams troubled him again. He saw mountains glowing under strange lights. He saw shadows of tall figures moving across valleys. He saw rivers running red though no wound was struck. He woke with a shiver and walked again to his window. The night outside was quiet. The wind moved through trees. Clouds covered the stars. Nothing seemed wrong. Yet his heart told him something was unfolding far beyond his sight. Something he had begun without knowing. Back in the mountains, alien officers gathered in tense circles, their voices low and urgent. Some said the humans had tricked them with false guidance. Some said the humans had powers they did not yet understand. Some said they should pull back and strike from orbit with fire. Yet others argued they should search deeper, dig through valleys, split the peaks apart, uncover what might be hidden. Their arguments filled the storm with rising echoes. But no answer came, only lightning across the sky. The longer they remained, the more fear grew among them. Not fear of battle, but fear of uncertainty. They had come ready to destroy. They had come ready to fight. But they had not come ready for silence. Silence that stretched across the mountains. Silence that seemed to laugh at their strength. They began to imagine eyes watching them from the shadows. They began to imagine clever traps waiting in the deep valleys. They began to imagine that humans had turned the entire land into a weapon. Scouts were sent in every direction. Their boots sank into snow. Their armor scraped against stone. They searched caves. They searched forests. But nothing answered. Nothing moved but the natural life of Earth. The commanders grew restless, their pride wounded, their certainty shaken. How could they explain this failure to their lords? How could they admit that one simple act had undone their great invasion? They did not yet know that the act had not been cunning but chance, that the man who pointed his hand had meant no harm. Yet the legend was already forming in their minds. They whispered to each other of human trickery. They whispered of humans who used words as weapons, who used kindness as a mask for war. They began to fear an enemy they had not yet met, an enemy that seemed to bend fate with a gesture, with a glance, with a simple direction spoken under a street lamp in the quiet night of a small town. The storm deepened as the fleet stood divided, the mountains silent, the forest still. The alien commanders argued through the night. Pride clashed with fear, anger battled with doubt, but above all a single truth grew heavier with each passing hour. They had landed in emptiness. They had prepared for battle, yet faced no foe. And in that emptiness their strength turned to weakness. Their certainty turned to confusion. Their invasion turned to failure before the first shot was ever fired. And so the night stretched on, with lightning flashing across peaks, with alien warships grounded in silence, with soldiers restless in their fear, while far away the human lay awake in his small room, unaware of the storm he had caused, unaware that his simple kindness had become a story that would echo beyond his world, a story written not in fire or blood, but in silence and in emptiness. Far beyond the mountains where the alien fleet stood in silence, another presence stirred. Hidden ships rested in the shadow of the outer planets, their forms sleek and silent. These were not part of the invading armada. They belonged to a different race. Watchers who had followed the invasion from the beginning, beings who had observed Earth for centuries without revealing themselves. They had expected the humans to fall quickly, to be crushed as so many others had been crushed. Yet what they saw filled them with wonder and fear. Through their long-range vision, they saw the fleet spread across empty peaks. Soldiers moving through forests, commanders shouting into storms. They saw confusion ripple through the armada, like fire spreading through dry grass. The invaders had expected war. They had prepared for fire and blood, yet they had been met with nothing but silence and wilderness. The watchers studied every detail and whispered among themselves. They began to understand something the invaders did not. They began to see that the humans were not weak, they were cunning. The watchers did not know about the man in the town. They did not know that he had only pointed with kindness. They believed what the invaders believed. They thought the human had spoken with purpose, with strategy, with knowledge of the stars. They thought he had misled the invaders on purpose, sending them to emptiness, forcing them to waste their strength, to fight shadows, to doubt themselves. In their eyes, this was not an accident. This was proof that humans could twist fate with words. Alone, inside the hidden ship's alien eyes glowed as they studied the recordings. They replayed the moment when the scouts spoke of the mountains. They replayed the landing. They replayed the silence of the peaks, and each time they grew more certain. The humans had set a trap without using a single weapon. They had broken the invasion before it began. The watchers whispered tales of ancient tricksters, of enemies who fought with deception rather than blades. They added humans to those tales now, placing them among the most dangerous of rivals. In the mountains, the invading commanders grew more restless. They ordered new scans. They sent more scouts. Yet every report was the same. Nothing but trees and snow. Nothing but rivers and stone. Their voices grew sharp. Some shouted for retreat. Others demanded orbital strikes. Yet none of these choices felt right. Their pride was wounded, their certainty broken, and every moment they lingered, the watchers above grew more impressed, for they saw fear spreading through the fleet like a sickness, and they believed that fear had been planted by human hands. Back in the quiet town, the man woke to another uneasy morning. He walked through the streets and greeted neighbors. He tried to smile. He tried to act normal. But he felt a weight he could not name, a sense that something far away had shifted. He looked off into the horizon where the mountains rose, their peaks hidden in mist. He felt as if those peaks were watching him, as if something beyond them was waiting. He did not know that eyes from across the stars were already fixed upon him. The watchers spoke of him, though they had never seen his face. They imagined a cunning figure cloaked in shadow, a human who could look into the eyes of an invader and twist their path with a single gesture. They gave him names in their tongue, names that meant trickster, deceiver, master of false paths. They did not know he was only a tired worker walking home on a quiet night. They did not know his answer had been nothing more than kindness. To them, he was the symbol of human danger, proof that humans were not prey, but predators hiding in plain sight. As the hours passed, the invading fleet argued among themselves, their leaders divided, their soldiers uneasy. They no longer trusted the path. They no longer trusted their scout. Yet they also feared to admit weakness. They feared to return home with nothing but failure. They feared the judgment of their lords. And so they lingered in the storm, waiting for a choice they could not make. And all the while the watchers above recorded everything, sending messages back to their own kind, telling stories that would spread through councils and markets, stories of humans who defeated an invasion with silence. The man in the town felt restless. He walked along the river. He sat by the trees. He tried to calm his thoughts, but the memory of the stranger's eyes returned again and again, glowing in the night, sharp and unearthly. He whispered to himself that he should have turned away, that he should have kept walking, but deep inside he wondered if he had done something important, if he had taken part in something greater than his life, though he could not imagine how far his small gesture had already traveled. Night returned, the stars shone again, and hidden ships remained in their watch, their voices quiet but certain. They spoke of how the humans must be studied, how they must be respected, how they must be feared. For if one man could twist the path of an entire fleet, then what could a united world of humans do? What power might they hold behind their silence, behind their simple words? The Watchers decided that the galaxy would no longer see Earth as weak. They would whisper of Earth as dangerous. In the mountains, the storm eased. The fleet stood in uneasy silence. Commanders stared at maps that meant nothing. Soldiers waited for orders that never came. And suspicion grew like fire in their ranks. Suspicion of the humans. Suspicion of their own leaders. Suspicion of fate itself. And high above in the hidden ships the watchers smiled cold smiles, for they believed they had just seen the birth of a legend. A legend that would spread across the stars and change the balance of fear. And so the night deepened once more, with a fleet lost in emptiness, with watchers whispering of danger, with a single man lying in his bed unaware. The story of humanity had begun to change, not with armies, not with battles, but with a simple answer given under the quiet light of a street lamp. An answer that had turned in a legend before the humans themselves even knew. The days passed slowly, and the human tried to live his life as before, yet something inside him refused to rest. He worked in the fields, he spoke with neighbors, he drank water from the well, but always his eyes returned to the distant mountains. Each evening he sat by his window and watched the horizon. Each night he dreamed of strange lights and tall figures. Each morning he woke with the same uneasy feeling that he had played a part in something larger than his small world. One afternoon, strange signs appeared in the sky. Faint lines that moved too quickly to be clouds, trails of fire that vanished as fast as they came. The townspeople whispered of falling stars. Some said they were omens. Some said they were tricks of weather. But the man knew deep inside they were not simple things. He remembered the glowing eyes of the traveler. He remembered the broken words. He remembered the gesture of his own hand pointing toward the mountains, and his heart grew heavier with each strange light. Soon whispers spread through the land. Farmers spoke of loud sounds like thunder with no storm. Shepherds claimed they saw shadows moving across the valleys at night. Hunters returned with tales of strange figures glimpsed among the trees. None could explain these things. None could prove them. Yet fear began to grow quietly among the people. They felt that something unseen was moving around them, something that did not belong to Earth. The man tried to ignore these whispers. He told himself it was nothing. Yet when he walked through the town, he noticed strangers he had never seen before. They watched with sharp eyes. They asked questions in soft voices. They carried tools that shone faintly under the sun. They moved with the stillness of hunters. He felt their gaze follow him wherever he went. He felt as if they knew him, though he had never spoken to them. Their presence filled him with unease. One evening, as he returned home, he found one of these strangers waiting by his door, tall and cloaked. The figure spoke with words more clear than the traveler, but still broken. It asked him about the night under the street lamp. It asked him about the directions he gave. It asked him about the mountains. The man felt his mouth grow dry. He answered as best he could. He said it was nothing. He said he only pointed where he thought a field might be. He said he had not understood the question. But the figure's eyes never left his, sharp and bright, like metal under fire. The figure left without reply, fading into the shadows. But the man knew his words had been carried away. He knew the watchers whispered of him. He knew that somewhere far above his name was spoken as legend, though he did not know what that legend claimed. He felt the weight of invisible chains around him, chains made not of steel but of stories, stories that painted him as something he was not, a deceiver, a trickster, a master of false paths, when in truth he had only tried to help a stranger. On a quiet night, in the mountains, the invading fleet stood in confusion still. Their commanders argued. Their soldiers grew restless, but the presence of the watchers made everything heavier, for the invading race began to fear that they were being judged. They began to fear that their failure was already known across the stars. They began to fear that humans were not what they had believed, and all of this weight circled back to the simple words of one man, words that had never been meant as weapons. The man walked through the town with the feeling that eyes were always on him. Even when he was alone, he heard faint sounds at night, whispers like wind through metal. He felt his dreams twist into visions. He saw fleets of fire above the earth. He saw beings bowing their heads in fear. He saw himself standing in shadows he could not escape. He woke shaking and cold, his heart racing, his hands trembling, and still he could not tell anyone. For who would believe such things? Who would believe that one small man had touched the course of worlds? One night, he climbed the hill outside the town. He stood beneath the stars. He whispered to the sky, asking if anyone could hear him. He asked if he had done wrong. He asked if he had doomed his world or saved it. He asked why he had been chosen. But no voice answered. Only the quiet of the night surrounded him. Yet far above, hidden ships listened, and their crews whispered to one another that the human was speaking again, that the human was aware, that the human was dangerous even in his questions. The next day, more strangers arrived in the town. They did not hide as carefully. They walked among the people with eyes sharp and bright. They asked about the man. They asked about his life. They asked where he went and who he spoke with. The townspeople grew nervous. They avoided his home. They turned their eyes away. They whispered in corners, for they felt that he had become something other than human. They felt that he was marked by powers they could not see. They feared to stand too close. The man felt this fear like a knife. He felt himself pulled away from his own people. He felt himself caught in a web he could not cut. And yet he still did not know the whole truth. He did not know that across the stars his name had already become a weapon, that the invaders feared him, that the watchers respected him, that species who had never spoken the name of Earth now spoke of its trickster. He was still the same man, yet he was no longer only himself. He was a story, and that story would not die. And so he lived each day with the shadow of the mountains before him, with the whispers of the strangers behind him, with the weight of legend pressing on his shoulders. He did not know how long this would last. He did not know what would come next. But he knew one thing with painful clarity. His life was no longer his own. It belonged to the story that had been born on that quiet night when a lost traveler asked a simple question, and he gave a simple answer. The storm over the mountains slowly faded as days turned into weeks. The invading fleet still lingered, but its fire had gone cold. Soldiers stood restless on barren slopes. Commanders whispered bitterly in their halls. The silence of the wilderness had defeated them without a battle. Pride was broken, plans were shattered, and fear spread quietly through their ranks like smoke that could not be held. They had come to conquer, but they had found only emptiness. And emptiness had undone them. Far above, in hidden orbits, the watchers continued their vigil. They sent signals to distant worlds. They told stories of what they had seen. They told stories of humans who turned aside a fleet with only words. They told stories of a man who misled an armada by pointing toward empty peaks. The tale grew with each retelling. It became sharper, more dangerous. It became legend. The galaxy began to whisper of the trickster of Earth, the human who could break armies without lifting a weapon. In the towns below, life moved on slowly. Farmers planted, children played, markets opened, yet an unseen weight pressed over everything. The man walked among his neighbors and saw how they avoided his eyes, how they spoke in hushed voices when he passed, how they looked toward the sky with unease. They did not know the full truth, but they felt the shadow of it. They felt that one of their own had become tied to something vast and alien. They felt both fear and pride, though they did not understand why. One night the man sat alone by the river. The water moved quietly under the stars. He thought of the traveler with glowing eyes. He thought of the simple gesture of his hand. He thought of the mountains that had become the grave of an invasion. He asked himself again and again if he had done right or wrong. He asked if he had doomed his world or saved it. Yet no answer came. Only the sound of the river and the cold light of the moon. But unseen ears listened, unseen eyes watched, and his quiet questions became part of the legend too. In the alien fleet, bitterness grew heavy. Some commanders demanded another strike. Some wanted to unleash fire from orbit. Yet others feared to move at all. They said the humans had already beaten them once. They said any move might be another trick. They said the silence of the mountains hid secrets they could not grasp. Suspicion poisoned them. Doubt tore through them. And at last they began to withdraw, ship by ship, shadow by shadow, until the sky above Earth grew clearer again. Yet they left behind whispers. They left behind the memory of their failure, and that memory would not fade. The watchers saw the retreat, and they nodded. They whispered that the humans had won. They whispered that Earth had shown strength unlike any other. They carried these words across the stars, into councils, into markets, into hidden corners of power. Soon species who had never spoken of Earth began to speak of it with care. They said, "Beware the tricksters, beware the humans who smile as they mislead. Beware the humans who can turn an army with kindness." The legend spread faster than light. It wrapped Earth in a cloak of mystery and fear. Back in the small town, the man lived quietly. Yet nothing was the same. Strangers still came and went, some with questions, some with silent stares, some with tools that recorded his every word. He could not escape their gaze. He could not escape the story. He was no longer just a man. He was a symbol. And he carried that weight, even though he never asked for it. He dreamed of returning to a simple life. Yet the world had marked him and the stars had claimed him. At times he sat alone in his home, his thoughts heavy. He whispered that he was only a worker, only a neighbor, only a man, not a legend, not a trickster, not a deceiver of fleets. Yet his words fell into silence, for the story no longer belonged to him. The story belonged to the galaxy. It had grown beyond truth. It had become something greater, something untouchable. And in that story, he would live forever whether he wished it or not. The alien fleet carried its shame back across the void. Their leaders demanded answers. Their commanders spoke of human trickery. Their soldiers whispered of fear. And so the myth of human danger grew, even among those who had never seen Earth. They said the humans do not fight with guns. They fight with words. They fight with silence. They fight with chance, and they win. Soon no invader would look upon Earth without remembering the tale of the man under the street lamp who changed the course of war with a simple direction. And so the legend of the trickster was born, a legend whispered in markets and in war councils, in ships and in palaces, in shadows and in light, a legend that painted humans as dangerous beyond measure, dangerous not for their weapons but for their minds, dangerous not for their armies but for their cunning, a legend that turned fear into respect and respect into caution. The galaxy would never see Earth the same way again. The man himself grew older, his hair turned gray, his hands grew rough, his back bent with years. Yet the weight never left him. He carried the story like a chain. Sometimes he wished to cast it away. Sometimes he wished to shout the truth that it had been nothing, that it had been only kindness. Yet he remained silent, for he knew the truth no longer mattered. The legend was stronger than truth, and the legend would outlive him. On quiet nights, he still walked to the hill and looked at the mountains, their peaks dark and eternal under the stars. He whispered to them as if they could answer. He whispered that he had never meant for this to happen. He whispered that he had only tried to help. But the mountains remained silent, the stars above shimmered, and the galaxy continued to whisper his name in fear. And so the story ended not with fire, not with battle, but with silence, silence that spread across the stars, silence that carried the weight of a legend. The legend of a human who pointed his hand and redirected an invasion fleet. The legend of a trickster who never knew he was one. The legend that would forever shape how the galaxy looked upon Earth.